black press in the United States is heir to a great, but unfortunately unheralded legacy. That legacy began right here in New York City when John B. Rushworm and Samuel Johnson published Freedom's Journal. This publication commenced on March 16, 1827. Approximately 20 years later, Frederick Douglass began publishing the North Star. Both of these publications were intended to bring to the forefront the plight of black people in this country. Our guest today is Mr. Bill Tatum, the owner-publisher of the Amsterdam News. He is also one of the architects of this ongoing tradition. Mr. Tatum, thank you for coming today. If we may, I'd like you to begin by giving us a biographical sketch of your life. Where were you born? Did you always intend to be a journalist? And how did you come to acquire the Amsterdam News?
A lot of questions. I'm not the publisher of the Amsterdam News. I am the publisher emeritus. Okay. My daughter, who's 29 years old now, is publisher, and she has been for the last 4 years. I think in order to know about one's life, one starts backwards. I'm married. I introduced them earlier to my wife, Susan, who's been my wife for almost 40 years. Susan, who was born in Czechoslovakia, was escaped from Czechoslovakia with her family during the late 1930s. Some members of her family died in concentration camps. We met here in New York City at a political gathering that saw a turn politically in this country to those who favor a democratic solution to problems. As we were driving here today, we understood from the latest report about who is going to be President of the United States that it will in all probability be George Bush. The reason for that is simple. The Republicans learned how to steal better than the Democrats. And because of where they are in the South, in this country, they have been able to distort reality and make themselves the rulers of this particular universe. Make no mistake about it. When you are President of the United States, you control the world. Now, Jesse Jackson is down in Florida right now, about to have some picket lines this afternoon. I'm going to put in a call to Jesse when I go home to tell him, Jesse, it's too late. They stole it already. Unless there is a person in the Supreme Court of the state of Florida who will say what happens here is wrong, and that I'm going to do something that no other politician in Florida would do, and that is to declare the ballots that are now being counted as valid, and perhaps the Gore team will win. Being here today, Mr. McIntosh, made me completely aware of where I was. Because you must understand that these are my children, all of them. Whether they're 16 or 20, they're my children. And within a very short time, they'll be out there alone. Parents notwithstanding, they will be alone, and they will be there in order to make a life for themselves. But I'm going back to biography for a minute. I was born in North Carolina in a place called Snow Hill. Actually, I was born in Durham, but Snow Hill is the farm from which my people came. There were 13 children, Mama and Daddy, so made 15 of us. And I never knew that we were poor. You are so far ahead. And when I walked into the studio today, I said, my God, I was just filmed. I did a television interview a few days back. Do you know the studio of this major station is not nearly as well equipped as you are to do television shows? It's a remarkable thing what has happened, Mr. McIntosh. We have a daughter. I told you about her. I could talk, and I won an oratorical contest. I won $100. Took off for Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Didn't have enough money to continue to go to school. I worked. Didn't do so well my first or second year because I had gone to schools that were not as good as this one. And most of the children with whom I was competing had gone to schools that were generally better than the one to which I had gone. But I learned a lot in my school, Hillside High School in Durham, North Carolina, which was one of the best in the bunch. But I was not prepared for college. So I didn't have money to stay there. I failed the course in math, physics, chemistry, what else? Almost everything you can think of, I failed. And I decided that it would be the better part of wisdom for me to join the United States Marine Corps, because I had been told that I could learn something while there and that they would help pay for my college education if and when I got out, because this was during the Korean War. Well, I went overseas during the Korean War, spent most of my time in Japan. We went to Korea, Okinawa, Iwo Jima, Formosa, China. So I traveled all over the Far East. When I came back, I was 21, and it was time for me to begin a life. And I began a life that did not see me get a master's degree until I was 40 years old, and a full-time job until I was 33 and already married. Were the opportunities there? Yes, they were there, but I was not yet prepared for them. But then we had a child, and I knew that that child had to know everything. So we made sure that she went to school. She went to Hunter College Elementary School because she was smart. But she was also dyslexic. So we had to put her with a tutor when she was 5 or 6 years old. And that tutor stayed with her until she got to high school. From Hunter College Elementary School, she went to a private school in Manhattan called Dwight rather. And after she left Dwight, she was able to get into a college in upstate New York, St. Lawrence University. She went there stayed for a year, and she wanted to have the black experience. So we sent her down to my college in Pennsylvania, Lincoln University. She stayed there for a bit, came back to St. Lawrence University, completed St. Lawrence, and then she wanted to go abroad to Stockholm, Sweden, because she believed that the social system there happened to be one of the best in the world, and that's a social democracy. She completed the year abroad in Stockholm, and by this time my daughter had gone to school, gotten her first master's degree, I believe, or the equivalent thereof. And I went over to Stockholm. My wife and I had bought a house over there by this time so that our daughter could have a place to live. She lived in the social democracy, learned the language, and prepared to do anything in the world that she wanted to do. I thought she was going to work with either the United Nations or the European Union. When she graduated, my wife and I went over there and took my daughter to lunch. And I said, "Okay, honey, it's time that we now stop giving you money. It's time for you to work." And I said, "What are you going to do?" She said, "Daddy, I want to come home to work with you." All my life, I had been trying to prepare my daughter for something that I believed was more important than what I did. And she sat there and explained to me, after she had traveled in Europe during her teenage years all over Africa, when she had delivered blankets and trucks and helped to build wells in places in Africa where there was no money nor the talent to sink wells for fresh water and deliver serum to people who had scarlet fever and all kinds of maladies that you find in the countries that she went to and lived in. And you must understand that she did this over my objection, really, over my wife's objection, when she was 16 years old. She realized, 16 and 17, she realized how important it was for her to go somewhere, do something, make something of herself. So when she called us and said she wanted to go on a trip, a safari, to Africa, that she and a group of youngsters aged 15 to 19 had decided that they were going to buy blankets, a truck, get money to sink wells. And she called and said she wanted to go. I think she was 16, perhaps 17. And she said, "Daddy, Mommy, I want to go with this group of children called the Teen Transport to Kenya, and then we want to drive on the St. Louis Highway up to another country, Mali, then Mozambique." Well, I had been there as a war correspondent. People were killing people there. You would drive on the St. Louis Highway and you could get blown up. And here's my kid telling me she wants to go. I said, "Who's going to be supervising?" She said, "Daddy, we're going to do it ourselves." Well, she started crying because she knew I was going to say no. And then she said, "Honey, Daddy, when you went to South Africa and you sneaked into the country because they wouldn't let you in because of the editorials you had written saying that they should be driven into the sea, I didn't complain when you went, nor did I complain when you went anywhere else in the world where you could have been killed. I stayed at home. Daddy, I want to go." My wife said, "She's right." And so for an entire summer, we waited for the telephone call that said our daughter was hurt, injured, or dead. Didn't happen. She came home committed.
Pardon me for interrupting you, sir. I just wanted to, as you continue to talk, and as we think about and meditate on what you're saying with respect to your experience and the experiences that your daughter has had, it occurs to me that if it were not for you, she would not have had the kind of mindset and the kind of energy that she had. And one of the things that I've wanted to ask you is, what has made you the kind of voice, what has given you the voice that you have? When I think of the legacy and the history of the black press in this country, and I think about how you are one of the architects of that legacy and that history, I recall asking one of my colleagues, or telling her that you were coming, and she said that you were an old warrior. And by that she meant you had been in myriad battles, you had fought the good fight. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you, and I can understand how your daughter would embrace and fight the good fight. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, what do you consider some of the most important struggles that you've had to wage as a black man, as a concerned parent, as a thinker, as a committed individual, as a voice that has contributed and continues to articulate the concerns of communities such as ours? Are there any that stick out in your mind as being significant and more important than others, and how have they shaped your thinking, and what role has the black press played in trying to further those causes and champion those causes that you consider important?
Well, first of all, both my wife and I were freedom riders. We went into the South trying to integrate several kinds of things, amusement parks, what have you. We marched with Martin Luther King. We did the trip from Selma to Montgomery. We were involved here in New York in myriad kinds of things that had to do with freeing a people from bondage. Most of you weren't even born when this happened. My dad was a major influence because Daddy decided that he was going to start a newspaper. And he started 3 of them in North Carolina. 1-page newspapers. We were on welfare during the entire time he was building a newspaper. But when I was 10 years old, he made me managing editor of his newspapers. And the reason he did that was because he had no employees, but he had 13 children. So he put all of us on the masthead so that from time to time people would believe, who would perhaps buy an ad, that there was an operating newspaper. Of course it was, but it was a 1-page newspaper or a 4-page newspaper based upon the advertising that he could get. But my father and my mother were determined that we would learn, that we would go to school and become the best that we could become. And I think it's parents, really.
As a journalist, and I followed a number of the editorials that you've written, as a journalist, I wonder if you consider the state of black journalism in this country relevant to the struggles of the Harlems of the world. Do you consider the agenda relevant? Do you consider the attempts to, as I said before, Frederick Douglass and others try to bring to the forefront the plight of black people in this country so that the general population, the larger population, would have a sense of what those struggles were? Do you think that the black press continues to try and further that tradition?
Yes, it does. Perhaps unsuccessfully very often, because our children watch BET. The level of concern on BET was how fast a black woman could shake her booty, or how often and how well a black man dressed as a clown could shake his booty. Do I criticize Bob Johnson for that? No, I don't. Bob figured out the way he could make some money and make it quickly, and he did. He's a billionaire now. He just sold out his entire holdings to a white company, and there is no major television presence owned by a black in America now. Another business in which I am involved, I'm one of the founding owners of Inner City Broadcasting. That's WLIB, WBLS in New York, and soon to be 30 other stations across the country, is going to become a public corporation. And I don't know who will own it after the shares are sold. But as we look around, the black newspapers, in the main, there are 250 of them in the United States. They are afraid to write about things that would irritate white people. Well, I must tell you, I could give less than a damn what white people think about what I say or what I write. The most they can do is close me down, and they haven't been able to do that for 90 years. Now, we just had interviews for the election for president. How strange it is that coming to our office was, what's his name, Gore? Coming to our office before that was President Clinton. Coming to our office this year was Hillary Clinton and all the other people who were trying to become the most important people in the United States. And the reason that they came to us was because our thesis is very simple. If you cannot come to us and speak to us in our territory, you will not get endorsed by our newspaper. Now, there is no other newspaper that can make that statement in the country. We demand that you come to us. If for some reason you can't get to us when we say you should come, then we make an arrangement, as we did with the gentleman who was running for the vice presidency on the Democratic ticket. We set up a conference call for a time when he would be getting off a plane in Des Moines, Iowa, and we hooked it up with the 10 members of our editorial board who were available to question that man for 30 minutes or so. I guess I can make it much simpler. I nor my family have ever had this idea that to be rich was all that important.
As I listen to you, and I'm only moving this forward because we want the young people to ask some questions, and I see the time is drawing nigh, I sincerely hope that you will come again. And we want to allow them maybe 20 minutes to ask you some questions.
If the children want me, I'll come back. If they don't, I don't care.
Yes, sir. Well, we want you back.
Okay.
The next question that I'd like to pose to you, as I read some of your editorials, I remember a statement that you made with respect to what's happening in Harlem with the Disney store, HMV, and you said that this energy that's coming into Harlem now is nothing, and I'm paraphrasing here, is nothing more than a cynical land grab to get Harlem for whites.
That's exactly what I said.
Okay.
I didn't say it was cynical. I said they're stealing Harlem.
Okay.
They're stealing Harlem because when blacks had an opportunity to buy Harlem, they did not. When our politicians had the opportunity to rebuild Harlem, they could not get the money from the federal government, the state government, and the city government to do it properly. And now they have built so much below 96th Street on the east and west side that they have nowhere to go. Look north, my children, that's Harlem. We can put those people out there only renting. They don't own a thing. When people don't own, that was not a bug, honey, that was that man. When they don't own something, you have a people who cannot, under any circumstance, ever be free. And I wrote it, I said it, but most black newspapers were not willing to take that chance. They said, well, you know, if I don't get this ad from that organization or that organization, I won't be able to publish. And that's probably true. But if you give a damn about what happens to your kids, you have got to take that chance. If you don't take that chance, there's no future for you, your child, or their children. I think of a time 15, 20 years from now when these young people are 30, 40, raising a family. They may like Harlem. I know I do. But they won't be able to stay because they haven't been able to buy a house and they can't pay the rent. And I don't know whether any of the children here, the young people here around them, have heard their mother and father say, oh my God, I don't have money to pay the rent, they're going to put me out. I know I experienced that very often as I was growing up.
Given this reality with the regentrification of Harlem, what is it that we can do about that, if anything? Or is it a fait accompli?
Well, it's not regentrification, it's gentrification.
Okay, gentrification.
What can we do about it? That's a hard question, but it's beginning right here in this room. You've got to be able to compete educationally and otherwise. That's why I was so glad to see this technology when I walked in. If you have a computer class, learn, because that's the future. But even more than that, the idea that you can become politicians in this community and not sell us out. There are those here who have, but politicians sell everybody out. But you've got some terrific politicians in this community Charles Rangel is one of them. Percy Sutton was one of them. There are some young ones who are coming along who are going to be terrific. But they're going to have young people who want to take their places. Our politicians failed because they did not have all of you in their political clubs as you grew up so that you could learn the game of America called the game of politics.
Having said that, we'd like to open the forum up, this conversation up, so that some of the young people here can ask some questions. This young man here? Oh, okay. We'd like to open the forum up so that some of the young people assembled here can ask some questions also. It's not my intention to sit here and to dominate this conversation. So we'd like to give you all an opportunity to do that. Would you care to come to the mic, my brother?
I'd like to correct that. Ask a question or make a statement. Because you've got to have feelings about what's going on in your life. I see a police car outside your school. Is it necessary for a police car to be there? But I was pleased. As my wife noted, they don't have those things where they have to check you out to see if you have metal coming in. Are there those here? No. See, they're almost everywhere now, which means that this is a special school. But we've written about the school very often in the Amsterdam News because it's a special school. Now, sir, you with the earrings that I'm going to mug you for,
I want to know.
Why don't you come up to the mic,
stand up
please?
and tell us all about it.
No, it's not that. I want to know, like, 'cause my teacher was telling me about the newspaper yesterday, and he was telling me about you always writing about Giuliani. I want to know if there's any personal reason why you're always writing about it.
No, except that he's done more to destroy black people than any other mayor before Koch. I wrote 204 editorials about Koch, saying that he should be removed, and black people finally removed him in order to pave the way to get a black mayor as head of the city. We never know what a politician is going to be like, but when you see a politician who tries to cut the ability of a school to get food for babies who have no food, you know that you have somebody who is willing and ready to destroy your lives. And I know Mr. Giuliani. I am not writing about somebody I don't know. I know the man. The man is evil. The man is evil, selfish, greedy, and one who would, I believe, destroy black people wholesale if he had an opportunity to do so. And the reason that I've continued to write about him, even when he was sick with cancer, he said, I don't know whether he has cancer or not. I don't see how you can have cancer and do all the things he's been doing, like going to a Yankee game every night, and while at the same time allowing people to rip off this city, including members of the mafia. And if you've read, you know that his family was at one time a part of the mafia. Black newspapers and papers like the Village Voice reveal these things. Sometimes the New York Times does not, or the Daily News, which to my way of thinking for black people is a piece of garbage. The New York Post is even worse. And when you look to see the black people they have employed, and you see them on television, and you hear them on radio, you have to say to yourself, who are these people? They're trying to promote the dominance of white people over the blacks, the Asians, the Hispanics in the city. How can we as black people grab these newspapers every day ride on the subway with them, and not be concerned about what happens to us. Black kid told me the other day, well, I only read the sports. There's an editorial page in the Daily News that destroys you. There's an editorial page in the Post that destroys you. So it is with most of the white newspapers and other ethnic newspapers in this city. And there has to be someone out there who can say, oh no, you won't go there. Not on my turf.
This young lady has a question, but this young man had his hand up first. So can we have your question, and
You
then
mean from Allstate?
Do you know the purpose for why Giuliani created that community service law and the loitering law?
Sure. White people do not like to see what they have caused. Let me explain it to you. People, and you know people in your own community, they're not out there busting people in the head and stealing and taking food off trucks or holding up restaurants because they were raised to do that. Many of them do it because they're hungry. Now there are the others out there who sell dope. There are others out there who steal for the profit. But if you sit one of these youngsters down, the youngster cannot write a simple sentence without error. It goes back to there. And the rest of the world does not need you unless you have an education. They don't need you. And we employ people. We've been employing people over at the Amsterdam News for almost 100 years. And one of the most pitiful things is to see a child come in for a job who can't fill out the application blank without error. And they come in with a diploma from a school that says they have graduated high school and sometimes college. They can't fill out an application blank. And, well, what skills do you have? What do you mean skills? Well, I know computer. Well, I said, well, what computer programs? I don't know. And they can't work at the Amsterdam News, nor can they work anywhere else except at McDonald's, and maybe not there.
we're going to come back to the question of education. But right now, this young lady is chomping at the bit, so we're
Which one?
this young lady here.
Oh, my
She
child.
has a question for you. Okay, we'll come to you next, okay?
Why do you think that there are newspapers for different ethnic groups?
Because people want to promote their own. They want to answer the questions that are not answered. I'll give you an example. Did you ever see in the New York Post a story about your television studio? Or something that a Wadley kid had done?
No.
Or about your special program that you have where older people come in and talk with the children about black history? You never saw it, did you? You're not gonna see it because you're not important. And you know why you aren't important? Because you haven't made yourselves important. You see, if black kids stopped wearing Jordache jeans for a week and then advertise that they are not going to wear them because of the policies of the company, Jordache jeans would wind up doing what Pepsi Cola did this past week. Give $195 million to their black employees for the discrimination they have used against them for the last 50 years. Did you know that? Did you read it? You didn't read it in the paper. It's in the paper. $195 million, and it should have been $995 million or 7,100 million. And that should apply to every company in this world. You know what a Pepsi-Cola is? Or a Coca-Cola? No, it was Coca-Cola that paid that money. Don't get me wrong. Pepsi-Cola hadn't been caught yet. But what I'm talking about is that you are trampled, and then somebody says something, join a picket line, and you say, for what? Hi, honey.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine. Referring to the first question that you asked by Rashad, how hard has it been hard trying to selling the Amsterdam News against the New York Post and the New York Daily News and the New York Times?
Oh, sure.
And since the newspaper started, have the sales increased or decreased?
They have increased at some times and decreased at others, based upon, and let's go back to gentrification. It's a Harlem newspaper. All you have to do is look at all the houses that have been torn down where people once lived who read the Amsterdam News. Many blacks have left the community, and they have been so involved in the middle class dream that they forgot that they left a whole bunch of black people here. And it was very often our most educated ones who left. Now, can you blame them? Not really. They want to make a better life for their kids. But they don't realize that if you're not in bunches, you don't have to be dealt with. If you can control a congressional seat, you have power. If you can control two, you have more power. If you can control or go into a relationship with another group of people to decide who the mayor of this town is going to be, you have power. We're talking about power relationships now and what it means to have power. Do I have power? Yes. Why do I have power? I have the written word, and that will last. 100 years from now, nobody will remember me, but they will remember the Amsterdam News, a newspaper that took a stand when no one else would. Someone who would go after the mayor of the city or the president of the United States without fear, because they believed that it was so important for our people to have a voice in what happened. And sometimes people ask me or my daughter, well, doesn't it get kind of lonely sometimes? Well, sure. When your other newspapers will not go along with you and they're cheating their customers, sure. It gets lonely, but I've been lonely before, and I'll be lonely again.
There's another young man in the rear. You've had a chance, my brother. We'll have to come back to you. We want to give everybody a chance. I think the young man in the rear, Brian, you had a question that you wanted to ask Mr. Tatum?
George W. Bush does in fact win, what do you plan to do? And I have another question. I looked at a poll on MSNBC. It says 93% of the black vote goes Democratic. Why do you think the black vote and the Latino vote goes Democratic, overwhelmingly Democratic?
Well, that's not even a good question. It's a great one. We believe that the Democratic Party has been closer to us and has done more to help us than the Republican Party ever has. And it simply happens to be true, except there was a man named Lincoln who was a Republican who is alleged to have freed us. No such thing ever happened. He did the Emancipation Proclamation because they did not wish to tear America apart. Now, this year, we got a call from the head of the Republican National Committee, and my wife and I, as well as two others, met with him at the St. Regis for cocktails so he could talk to us about what Mr. Bush would do for us. I'm not meaning the newspaper, but for black people. When I got through with the agenda that had to do with vouchers, school lunches, Planned Parenthood, etc., I knew that this man was not for us. And when he left, he said he'd be in touch. And I don't remember whether I said don't bother or I said something else. I'm not sure. But P.S., he knew that he was not welcome with his platform in our community or our newspaper. And you must look and remember what has happened recently. Did you ever see George Bush come up here? Did you? So that's a clue. That's a clue. And there's a young black woman who ran on the Republican ticket. She ran downtown, actually, at a little sliver of the east side. She got 24% of the vote. The Amsterdam News did not support her. She was a Republican, and the values that she articulated were not the values that would be best to my way of thinking, to our way of thinking for black people.
Mr. Tatum, sir, it's indeed a pleasure to have you here, and unfortunately the bell is going to ring. We're going to make arrangements to continue this conversation, but permit me, if I may, I received your biography this morning, and as I read it, the last statement that you made was something that really touched me, and I just want to share it by way of concluding this conversation. And I apologize, young people, that we don't have enough time for us to continue this dialogue right now. But Mr. Tatum says, of his career, what would life for me and my family have been like had I known equal opportunity, or had been able to play the game of life on a level playing field? And what would my life then have meant to America? I think that statement epitomizes much of what we all experience and feel. And sir, again, I thank you for coming today. That bell is going to ring in a few minutes, and we regret that we have these time constraints. We're going to ask you to come back, and we'll have these young people here again, and hopefully we'll have a forum where we can talk more expansively about some of the things that we've talked about today.
Well, I will only accept I got a show of hands of those who want me to come. I got one over here who didn't raise her hand. Make sure that she doesn't come to school that day. Let me say thank you, all of you, for coming in here, because I think it's so important